Thank you, Kiva. And I'd like to really, I'm very grateful for everybody who actually show up here on a Saturday to spend 3 painful hours with me. And I hope this will be useful for you. And basically, the purpose is to really study of what can we do to actually live healthy and long. And it's going to have this is going to be a 3 parts kind of, session. First, we're going to try to address the why and what. And really the what, it's number 1, sugar, and number 2, ultra-processed food. And then part 3 is we're going to be of how to fix it. And everybody knows, exercise and eating healthy is good for you, but let's see how we can actually achieve it in a way that works. So the why and what, and the basically the sugar. Here is why. If you come to see me as a new patient, life expectancy of a patient who starts to see me, it's about 50% are not alive 6 months. That's advanced end-stage heart failure. And it looks like, okay, let's just focus on the heart. But the truth is, there are lots of other conditions that you accumulate along this happen. They started at least 10, 15 years before, some of them progressing to heart failure, some of them not. And those are actually just the symptoms of what really is the root cause of all this. And what we know is that once you start to develop also kidney problems, that's when you start to end up in a hospital and pretty much becoming close to end-stage heart failure. And then we go back and say, okay, what causes all this? And then you say, well, 10, 20 years ago, well, I had sleep apnea, diabetes, obesity. Well, those are actually not the root cause of what's happening either, okay? What really is causing is actually, I'm going to try to convince you, is actually excessive consumption over 10, 20, 30, 40 years of our life of sugar and ultra-processed food, which the first organ that's actually impacted by this is actually liver, and namely a condition called fatty liver that immediately brings on diabetes. And then we develop eventually the other conditions that are associated with heart disease, that we try to treat them separate, but they're really symptom of the same problem. And then eventually we develop heart failure and kidney disease. So that's the why. And another reason the why is actually, if you were to just sum this up, 90% of us will die of one of these 4 conditions. Okay, cancer, dementia, cardiovascular disease. This is what Peter Attia calls them, the 4 horsemen. And really, those 3, actually, cancer, dementia, and cardiovascular disease, are actually caused by the one huge horseman, and that's diabetes and insulin resistance. By the way, I highly recommend everybody to read this book. I'll give The Science of Art and Longevity by Peter Attia. And let's talk about obesity. Obvious now, everybody gets on Ozempic. It's a wonderful new drug that helps us lose weight. And yeah, that will target somebody with severe obesity to help them. Unfortunately, if you were to look at all the people who live in our country, if you look at people who are obese, about 42% of the population is obese, as defined with a BMI over 30. But from those, about 80% will be morbidly obese, which means you also have disease. You're not just overweight. You have diabetes, you have high blood pressure, and heart disease. But 20% will be obese without necessarily being sick. They're just metabolic healthy obese. They have genes that makes them prone to be a little on the overweight side. And if you were to look in the lean population, actually 60%, even if they are lean, are going to have the problem, the diabetes and the metabolic syndrome, and they will be sick. So being obese, sure, it helps us focus and have empathy and try to help those. But actually, if you were to do the absolute number of those who are lean that are sick, it's actually more than the ones who are obese. So pointing the finger at obesity as a risk factor is just not good enough, if at least for a physician. All I care is you're sick. And if I try to sort that out and we put them all together, it's actually half the population living in this country right now, about 130 million, are actually sick, independent if they're obese or they're not obese. This was actually signaled by Dr. Robert Lustig, which you're going to hear me quoting him a lot. A lot of this science I learned from him. This is another book that I highly recommend, Metabolic, that one should read. It was actually it's written for this purpose, and it's all science. behind this, but he explains it in an excellent way. And just to make a point that diabetes is not just a problem for somebody who's obese. In the last 5 years, this is data from 2015, 2020, the highest rate of new type diabetics in this country, it's increased ninefold. It is somebody with actually who is lean, and we define that as a BMI of 25. Just to get an idea, I am 23. So just because you're lean or you're not lean, it means nothing, whether you have the disease or you don't have disease. So, and the way we figure about the disease is called metabolic syndrome. You have any 3 out of these 5 risk factors, whether it's central obesity, we check some blood tests for cholesterol, we look at triglycerides, they're high, your good HDL, the good cholesterol, which is HDL, is low, high blood pressure, hypoglycemia, that means you don't have diabetes, but your fasting glucose is a little between 100 and 120. If we have any 3 out of 5, we're going to call you metabolic syndrome, which means huge risk of progression towards diabetes and having, you're not metabolically healthy. And turns out, if we were to look at this as of 2019, only 12% of us are actually metabolically healthy. Okay, so we talking about a pandemic. This is a true pandemic. We really need to get to the bottom of what's causing this, and we can look at how much is the risk factor of morbid obesity by itself with a BMI over 30, and indeed, obesity per se, it's increasing by 2.5 to 3-fold your risk of cancer, dying from heart disease, or dying of Alzheimer's. But if I were to look at the risk factors of metabolic syndrome, which is defined of elevated fasting insulin in your bloodstream, insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, as whole continuum, and type 2 diabetes, then the risk is twice higher than what obesity will do per se. So the real problem here is actually not whether we're obese or we're lean. The real problem here is whether we have elevated fasting insulin and if we are on the way to developing full-blown diabetes. Unfortunately, if you were to look only at when we define type 2 diabetes, there's a sugar of 120 after we fasting, it's already late in the disease. There are actually, for 10, 20, 30 years, was developing in the background. We have our insulin level up, and the insulin, chronic activation of insulin that's high is what causes us being actually sick. And I'm going to explain that to you. So we got a big dilemma here. And if we were to look at the fat, actually it's not the amount of fat that matters in the body, it's the location of the fat. So this is actually an MRI study. This is also from Dr. Robert Lustig. And we can actually see where the fat is located. It's an example of metabolic healthy person who has a lot of subcutaneous fat here, but has almost no fat in the liver. That's why the liver is black on this MRI. If you were to look at this one next to it, is the same, that has the same obesity here, but it's got 20% of his liver, 24% of liver that has fat. Now this is the one who's going to die of one of those 3 conditions that I was telling you, one of the horsemen. And then I can look at the lean version, which will be somebody more like me. You can have absolutely almost no subcutaneous fat accumulation. You are thin outside, you have a low BMI, but you can have 24% of fat. This one is as thick as that one, and you will become one of my patients, just like the other one. So you see the location of the fat, whether it's in the liver or not, or visceral fat that matters. And you only need about a pound of fat to accumulate in the liver to actually get you sick and have diabetes, and you don't even know about it. Why? A pound on the scale is just within the limits of detection. It's a variation. You won't be able to detect it that way. The issue with if we were to accumulate now fat, not in the liver, but in the rest of your abdomen, what we call visceral fat, that's the next most dangerous one, because you need only about 5 pounds before you're going to start accumulating fat in your liver. Why? Everything that's happening from the visceral fat eventually drains into the liver, and eventually is going to get a sick liver, but you only need 5 pounds of that. And that visceral fat, okay, is actually caused by stress, by cortisol. All right, it's not so much caused by how you eat. It can be aggravated by you eat. And then if you have your lucky one, they actually genetically are prone to actually be a little on the chubby side. you need about 22 pounds to accumulate in your fat in order to be able actually to eventually get sick and have fat in the liver. As a matter of fact, you're protected. You need to gain at least 30, 40, 50 pounds before you're going to have your liver affected. So being obese and being lean, it doesn't predict whether you're going to be sick. What matters is where's your fat in the liver. So now that begs the question is, if that's what matters, and I cannot detect it by scale, how on earth am I going to know I have fatty liver and I have potential diabetes later on? Well, here's how we know. We can check some blood tests. First of all, some sober stats. You say, well, I don't have fatty liver, I'm healthy, okay? And it's true, at least definitely somebody on the last row, most of you, all right? But if you're more like me and my age at 55, 1 out of 2 adults have fatty liver, okay? And children, 1 out of 4. I'm talking about 5 years old children, okay? 5 years old children. There are 10, 12, 18 years old children who get liver transplant because of fatty liver, okay? So this is the true pandemic here. It's a major problem. And then why? Because once you have fatty liver, you're going to have diabetes. Done. That doesn't mean we cannot reverse it, but we need to understand why and how. And that's important. Okay? So then, okay, how do we know about that? Okay, and one way is I can check some simple blood tests that actually we can do that every day. Is we can look at triglycerides to HDL ratio. That's your lipid profile. I know everybody looks for the bad cholesterol, the LDL. That's the least of our problems. Is the triglycerides to HDL ratio that matters. We can check some liver enzymes like alkaline ALT. We can check your fasting insulin. We can check your hemoglobin 1C. Everybody familiar with the hemoglobin 1C? That's what we usually check, and not the others. Marker for inflammation, for uric acid. But those are just surrogate blood tests. It doesn't tell us for sure. If some of them can be normal, you can still have fatty liver. But I'll give you a simple rule of thumb how you know if you have or you're about to have fatty liver or diabetes. Here's, answer this question in your mind. Okay, if you have a sweet tooth, you're going to get it. Okay, all right, and I will show you why. How to diagnose insulin resistance? So there are some other more solid things. You can just check your body for this kind of marks. For example, this is a skin tag. That's a marker of insulin resistance. This is, you have a little, darkening of the skin around your knuckles or in axilla. That's called acanthosis nigricans. You can have actually insulin resistance. How about this, which is much more common? Acne. You guys know why as teenagers we get acne? Because being teenager and being at puberty, it's a natural form of insulin resistance and diabetes. That we need to do that to grow. That's when we use our insulin as a growth hormone, not as a glucose managing hormone and storage. But that goes away being at puberty. So, but then if your acne persists beyond 20 years, then you got a problem, okay? So here's some more sobering statistics of why. In the 60s, less than 1% of people in this country had type 2 diabetes. In 2023, it's 11%. That's 11% increase, the 11-fold increase. One can acknowledge that no matter how hard you try to blame it on the genes, we really don't multiply every 4 weeks like mice. We have not changed our genes. Okay, some genes can make us predisposed to, but that's not what's causing it. And then most of the somebody who is diabetic in this country, most of them are actually younger than 65, and half of us were not aware because nobody's looking. And then if we were to compare to data from 70s, less than 0.1% were younger than 65. Used to be diabetes type 2 used to be a disease of old age, not anymore. As a matter of fact, children get type 2 diabetes now. This condition never existed in children prior to 1990. And it's predicted this is the fastest growing population to get type 2 diabetes is our children. Okay, so this is extremely scary. And this is why, because children get fatty liver and they will get type 2 diabetes. And I'm going to try to make a case for you. This is caused by excessive sugar consumption and in particular fructose from the sugar. And it's not me who said that. is actually Dr. Robert Lustig, who is the first to actually discuss in a seminal lecture that he published at University of California in San Francisco that he published in 2009, Sugar, the Bitter Truth. I encourage everybody to watch it. It's still present on the internet, where he's the first who actually hypothesized that really it's the fructose from sugar addiction that causes fatty liver and type 2 diabetes in children. These two conditions, fatty liver and diabetes, never existed prior to 1990. And he was in the position to sense that because he's been practicing before and after 1990. And suddenly he had this epidemic of kids who are having this condition. So he felt compelled, I got to answer this. I got to find an answer to this question. And if prior to 1990, if you had fatty liver, you actually were an alcoholic. So, but kids don't drink alcohol. So how come they're getting fatty liver and type 2 diabetes? And he actually looked back into the biochemistry book and found that sugar, which has two components, glucose and fructose, the fructose part of that gives us actually the sweet taste, it's metabolized actually in the liver just like alcohol. So it says it's got to be the fructose because it's in everything that these kids eat or drink. And this is a busy slide. The purpose of is not to confuse you, just follow what I'm saying. Imagine that you have kids that's as early as the childhood, they have fatty liver, insulin resistance. We're going to follow them as adults, and they come to see me 10, 20, 30 years later, all right? In the first, 90% of these 20, 30 years, they'll have no symptoms. They don't know anything what's happening. All right. Eventually, somebody diagnoses them with diabetes when the sugar goes higher than 120. Or you get to see me, depending which organ fails first, you may get to see me in terms of heart failure and you don't have diabetes. All right. Or you may develop first kidney disease. This is where the genes come into play. Which organ is going to be affected first that prompts you to the doctor? That depends on your genetic profile. Okay, but you're gonna, if you live long enough, you're gonna get all these conditions, I promise you. All right, and that's the reason why I'm addressing that. And anybody who's been in our heart failure clinic for a long time knows that all of these conditions eventually happen to the same patient. But what's fascinating is this: I can't convince neither the doctors, neither the patient, that just because you don't have any symptoms, you don't have other diseases, because I can signal that. I can get a blood test, I can look your triglycerides to HDL ratio, and I'm gonna say, I don't care if somebody told you don't have diabetes, your liver is already seeing diabetes, okay? And it starts with this elevated insulin first, 10, 20, 30 years before. And then elevated insulin leads to insulin resistance. In other words, our cells start to say, it's too much insulin, we need a break. And then eventually we develop a condition called prediabetes, which is probably the worst term doctors have ever come with. Because prediabetes is like, I'm pre-pregnant. I say, what do you mean? You're either pregnant or you're not. Okay? I'm pre-dead. I'm not dead yet, therefore I can enjoy life. I don't have to worry about a thing. What does it mean? When we know that if we don't do something, just because I don't have a drug for it doesn't mean you're not sick. Just because you don't have any symptoms doesn't mean you're not going to be sick. And the main reason why, so there are 4 stages of diabetes. This is what I'm trying to get to. Elevated fasting insulin, insulin resistance too much, and the cell starts to resist. Then you have prediabetes, and eventually we have full-blown diabetes when the when the glucose goes up. But by the time the glucose goes up, you already had 10, 20, 30 years of exposure to insulin, which is also a growth hormone, not just a glucose handling hormone. And it is that duration of exposure that's been working with abnormal growth in your arteries, in your liver, in your brain, and to your heart, in kidneys, that's causing the damage, okay? And because insulin has 2 roles. So keep that in mind. So going back then, if we were to address the sugar, the elephant in the room really is fructose. And fructose comes in the form of sugar. And of course, who wants you to ignore that? I don't have to say it. It's food industry. It's been going on for 50 years. One myth that we have is, oh, if it comes natural from honey and agave and maple syrup, it's fine. No, it's not fine. Okay, I mean, it's fine for bees, it's fine for bears before they go wintering because they'll never see it for another year. But it's not fine for humans who eat that every day, because anything that's natural in unnatural amount is poison. Okay, and that we've known this since 1537, and I'm going to show you how. But first, I'm going to make this little confession. And I think Wendell Berry, who is actually a very famous novelist, I don't know if anybody knows of him, he said that peoples are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and are treated by the health industry, which pays no attention to food. And we need to change that, okay? And the classic dogma is this, and this is what we've known for the last 50 years, and I would like to be corrected by one person who doesn't agree that that's what we know, is that the classic dogma, you get overweight because you eat a lot of calories and you exercise very low. So it's very simple. That's how you get obese. You're lazy and you eat too much and you get fatty liver and insulin resistant. All right? Good. That's the case. We stop eating and we exercise, we're going to all lose weight. Guess what? It doesn't work. So that's a wrong dogma. Actually, we have almost no evidence about that working. The real, and here is a point, and this is from a actual world expert at NIH, Dr. Kevin Hall, who is a physicist by training, but it's a very, it's a fabulous scientist. Look, this is actually a copy of one of our papers from Journal of American Medical Association of 2018, that these are clinical recommendations we're supposed to tell our patients and everybody. If you reduce your caloric ingestion you count your calories, and you just need to cut it down by 500 calories a day, and by the end of the week, you're going to lose a pound. Right? Okay. So if you were to continue like this for 4 years, you'll evaporate. There'll be nothing left over of you. All right? Obvious, this is wrong. No matter how you turn it around, it's not going to happen. And he's right. And the reason he's right, even if you cut it to less than 850 calories a day, by the way, we've done these studies. 850 calories a day is 2 apples, just so you have an idea. Or somebody who just had bariatric surgery, if anybody has had here in the audience, they know that. By the way, that's how bariatric surgery works. You can't eat more than 100 calories a day for a good 3-6 months, okay? All right? So you do that, even then you'll lose some weight and eventually stabilize. And the reason why is that we have an amazing brain center that controls our food intake and our energy expenditure that's called in the hypothalamus, the part of our brain it's like a homeostatic lipostat. Our brain is adapted for starvation and survival. It will stop us from doing that. As a matter of fact, the moment you try to fight by reducing your calories, your brain is going to do the opposite. It's going to stop spending your calories. It's going to stop burning. And actually, most of us trying to do that, if you haven't tried, which I doubt, I'm pretty sure everybody in this room except the kids have tried to lose weight. And each time they try to cut their calories, they end up having higher weight later on. And that's why, because our brain will stop you from doing that. If that's the only information and science you have behind, it doesn't work. And here's why it doesn't work. Because we have an evolutionary conserved survival mechanism that started over 2.5 million years ago, when we used to have, we had glacier periods. We had only, for 10,000 years, everything was extremely cold and icy. We didn't have food for 6 months a year. So how did we survive with that? Well, we survived because there were signals and clues from the food we were eating. One of them is fructose. And that's why we preserve it as having actually the ability in our cells to react to fructose. Fructose back then, when it was just at the end of the summer from either honey or fruits, and it was designed to be sweet. Number one is, if it's sweet, it wasn't poisonous, so we could try it. Number two, if it was sweet, we'd like it. And fruit trees figure that out, because then we eat them, and then animals will spread the seed in some other place. And that's why the trees were doing it. But for us, the way it was beneficial, when we had abundance of food, it would trigger a starvation signal to store. Winter is coming. You need to start storing. So if you eat any fructose, everything you eat after that is going to be switched to storage. Okay, and that helped us survive. And Dr. Richard Johnson, actually from University of Colorado, is a nephrologist, been doing these studies for 30 years, has proven all these mechanisms I'm talking about. And basically, it helps us. Fructose makes us go and eat when we're hungry. It helps bears to survive the winter, fatten up right away before the winter. It's not really the salmon they eat; it's actually the fructose they eat from fruits and honey that tells everything you eat from now on you're going to store. They fatten up very fast before the winter. They got 3-4 weeks. And then they can afford to get rid of all that. Why? They don't eat anything for 6 months. So they get diabetes for a month or two, but then they take a break. So all that is being used. It's a survival mechanism. The same for the camels. You know, they survive. We actually store salt and water into the fat here in the lump of the camel. For 1 gram of fat stores 1 gram of water. So actually, the farmers know to, as soon as the camel hump starts to be soft, they start giving them sugar so they can fatten up there, and that's how they're going to be able to resist dehydration, and then they dissolve that fat and release the water. The same with the whales. They have, that's how they preserve their sweet water. But what's really most fascinating is the naked mole rat, who lives in very low, very, deep, under earth, with almost no oxygen environment. And how that adapts us to the low oxygen environment. Here's a fun, interesting fact. Okay, this is a map of the United States incidence of cardiovascular disease per state. If you're deep dark blue, you have a lot of cardiovascular disease. If you're light blue, you don't. So which one is the state that wins with the lowest cardiovascular disease? Colorado. They're very proud of that. That's 5.7%. Why? Because they live out and they hike and they live outdoors, right? No, wrong. Dr. Lustig actually explained the mechanism, okay? They live at low oxygen, high altitude. And is that low oxygen, there's the same like in naked rat mole, actually converts our glucose inside our body without us even having to eat in low amounts of fructose. And low amounts of fructose converts our mitochondria, instead of burning food, to actually adapt and produce few free radicals. And the less free radicals we produce in our cells, the longer we live, okay? And that's the mechanism, all right? So, in other words, fructose in low amounts and from time to time seasonal, that's why it was helpful for our survival. The problem is when we have it every day, okay? And a lot. How much is a lot? Well, here's how it comes. Sugar is made of glucose and fructose, right? And it's connected together most of the time in the fruits by this bond that's easily cut by one of our enzymes in the stomach, immediately released. And if we just to eat glucose actually, it's not bad. It's actually good for us. It helps us burn for energy. There's no toxicity if we eat too much glucose. By the way, that's the molasses. Okay, it's not sweet and it's not addictive. And our mitochondria, which are the main source of energy, are able to burn inside the cell. Okay. What about fructose, the other element? Well, fructose is sweet, stores as fat, makes us retain salt and water. We have toxicity from storage. That's the fatty liver I'm telling you about, and in the brain. And the reason is because it talks to mitochondria and is the addictive part, the sweet stuff that matters and causes insulin resistance and diabetes. Do you know of any other product that is like that, or another drug that is like that? And the other one is alcohol, just like that. The difference, one is socially accepted, the other one is not. Okay, so you have no problem saying you have a sweet tooth, but you do have a problem saying you're an alcoholic. But that's what matters, because our liver metabolizes fructose just like alcohol. No difference, absolutely no difference. And that's why we have a problem. So from now on, whenever I say fructose, think alcohol, because that's what your liver is seeing. It's not seeing anything else. All right? So, and again, is the excessive consumption every day that is a problem. It's not just a low amount and from time to time. And why is that important? Well, let me show you what happens in excessive consumption. And I will define that soon, what it is. Cells, they have to make a decision what to do with the nutrients they get, whether it's glucose, whether it's proteins, whether it's fat. And shall I burn or shall I store or grow? And they're looking for cues from outside. fructose is one of those cues that actually reprograms the cell itself, says winter is coming. I need you to starve and I need you to store. So it blocks actually anything you're going to eat that day. If you had excessive fructose consumption, is not going to be burned, it's going to be stored. And that because it blocks our mitochondria, which is the oven where we make the energy and we burn all that, source of nutrients, and it converts it into storage and actually activates the insulin eventually to store everything we eat, fats and proteins, into that. So it basically reprograms our cell and tells you're not burning, you're going to store. So you had that in a day, that's what happens. And then you keep doing that every day for months, years. This is what happens. This is a normal liver, and this is a fatty liver. Our liver cells start to accumulate fat, because when you have too much fructose at one point, liver needs to do something with it, and it's going to start storing, or it's going to start secreting outside. And I'm going to show you what happens when it goes in the bloodstream. But that's the number one cause of fatty liver, other than the alcohol in this country. And you say, well, I don't eat that much sugar, and there are plenty of teenagers, all they do, I stay away from the sugar. Well, but they have their coffee at Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts. Or at least I put here from the right to left, in increasing amount of sugar. You can go from the least with the sugary part is 8 teaspoons of sugar, all the way up to 46 teaspoons of sugar. But that's the pumpkin swirl frozen coffee. I never heard of it, but I'm sure somebody is drinking it. And that's equivalent to 14 donuts. All right, and then you say, okay, how much sugar do we need? Really? I would like to know where's my normal limit. So let me try to just stay within that. And the answer is 0. We don't need sugar. We don't need glucose. It's essential for us. That's why our liver can make it out of fat or protein or anything else it needs. Okay. Having said that, there is an upper limit, which is about 16 spoons of sugar. Why is that? Because our gut can metabolize the fructose equivalent up to 6 teaspoons of sugar a day without that fructose having to go into the liver. In other words, if you keep it below that, that's the safety data. That's for women. For men, is 9 teaspoons of sugar. And I actually don't think you should do that, because there is one more problem. I recommend you should have that limit maybe once a week, not every day. And the reason is, once you put that sweet in your mouth, you're going to eat more than 6 teaspoons of sugar a day. You're not going to control it, all right? And it's a problem. So just take home message. Fructose prevents glucose and fats from burning our cells and store them as fat. So the moment, if you start your breakfast with a glass of orange juice, which is 6 teaspoons of sugar, any extra sugar beyond that, anything you eat after that, is going to be stored that day. Make no mistake. That's the message. Of course, there are no absolutes in what we do. Some people may have different metabolism. Some people can do more, some less. But that's the idea. I would like for you to understand the direction. It doesn't matter how much exercise you do that day, unless you do 4 or 6 hours a day. But if you're merely a human like me, less than an hour and a half a day, then you're not going to be able to burn that. So the real evidence, what it shows is that fructose, independent of its calories, sends a signal to our cell to get hungry. We need to store. We need to prepare for winter. And if you have it excessive consumption, you get fatty liver and you get diabetes and insulin resistance. And I'm going to show you a few mechanisms how this fructose does that. Okay? So the first one is that as soon as you have an intake over 6 teaspoons equivalent a day, then that fructose, it skips the gut and it enters into the liver straight. That's the first station from the gut. When it enters into the liver, it's going to block the mitochondria from the liver from utilizing anything else. And it's going to switch to start storing that fructose into fat. And the fat, what we call triglycerides. So first, fat will accumulate in the liver. Eventually, some of it will escape into the bloodstream and will go into our subcutaneous fat, and that's how we start to gain weight. And again, the more ability to accumulate subcutaneous fat you have, actually the more protected you are, because it doesn't go into your liver. But eventually, liver can't take it anymore from too much fat is accumulating and start to spill all that excessive fat, which is triglycerides to be specific, into the bloodstream. And those triglycerides then start to be packed into this bad cholesterol that we call LDL. And the truth is 80% of LDL is actually not bad, it's actually good. We need that LDL to transport cholesterol because all our cells need cholesterol and need triglycerides to burn. The problem is that 20% of that cholesterol is oxidized and rancid. And that's where these triglycerides going up are going to end up into. Okay, and by the way, that bad cholesterol that I'm talking about, the oxidized version, okay, is actually not so much affected by the cholesterol pill. So if you say, well, I don't care, I'm going to eat my sugar, I'm going to take my cholesterol pill because all my LDL is good. No, that's not going to protect you from a heart attack. Okay, so now we start to have deposits of this oxidized LDL into your arteries, and that's going, over, it takes 10, 20, 30 years the same way, okay? And you don't feel it until you hit at least 80% of artery to be blocked, and you start to have chest pain or you get a heart attack. So then you can go to Sorescu for various issues. You have chest pain, and the first thing I'm going to do, if you don't have anything else, I'm going to assess your heart risk profile, and I'm going to send for this test that I showed you. We'll look for the metabolic syndrome and for insulin resistance and some other, or fatty liver. But some of them are maybe abnormal, some of them may not be abnormal. And what you need to know is that if I see that any of those are abnormal, okay, I'm going to know that either you're an alcoholic, which I really extremely rare nowadays when I have a patient like that, or you eat too much fructose. There is no other reason, okay? And why? Because it's seen as alcohol, that causes the fatty liver, and you can say it can come from 6 ounces of orange juice, that equivalent of 1 shot of bourbon. By the way, 6 ounces of orange juice is metabolized by liver like equivalent of 1 shot of bourbon. Or half a cup of cereals, by the way, all right? 1 teaspoon of raisin, super concentrated in sugar, half of the protein bar that they are sold as, oh, you get some protein supplements. No, you're getting sugar supplements. And we give this to our children since they are born, and not just once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day, as many times as they want. And there's some good news about this, but I think mostly it's bad news. If they really ask for it, just give them the orange. That's much better. I'll explain to you why. It has fiber that binds the fructose, so it doesn't release the fructose in our system. And that's why eat the fruit. So then we keep, and what's the reality? I told you we're supposed to eat less than 6 teaspoons of sugar a day. Do you know how much we eat? 4 times more than that, equivalent about 90 grams of sugar a day. That's an average person living in this country. That's the data from a few years ago, okay? So if we do that, and I'm gonna follow this person, I can guarantee you is going to be my patient. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Why? Because now, after you've done this for months and years, and the older you get, you're no longer protected by your youth. Okay? Then the fructose that's in that comes out from the gut into the liver is going to actually tell your liver to make glucose. Why? Because your liver gets fat with fat. Liver can't make its mind anymore and say, well, we're starving, but the other cells his job is to create glucose for the other tissues. So it's going to say, well, if I'm starving, it's not enough glucose. It actually paradoxically starts making glucose. Your sugar starts to go up, and that stimulates the pancreas to release insulin, and that long-term makes you have more insulin. And the insulin then takes that glucose, it puts it into fat, and you start to gain weight, and you don't know why. And then on top of that, your brain cannot store that glucose into fat because our skull cannot move. Where are you going to put it? So what it does is it's actually from the insulin, it's going to resist the insulin, gets insulin resistance, it's going to be starving. So that's why we're hungry all the time when we eat anything sweet. You'll never stop eating. You know how many times we eat, a day? About 8 times a day, from which is 3 main meals and 5 snacks. Do you think that we're really hungry to eat 8 times a day? And that's normal. No, we're hungry because we eat anything sweet that we may or may not know about it. All right, so that's that. And then we can do this for weeks, months, and years. And why is that important? Because, we call this carbage, basically. The combination between carbs and fats are the most potent stimulus actually for insulin release. And ideally, you like your insulin, if we were to measure it, we are so lucky to be able to have a test like we do for glucose, to have 24 hours continuous monitor of insulin, we could have detected and cured this disease a long time ago. Unfortunately, we don't, because we don't see that, we don't measure that, and we're not there yet, but I think one day we'll be there. But ideally, you like, if you're healthy, metabolic healthy, your insulin go up for 2 or 3 and then goes back down. Up and down, up and down. That's how you want. That means you're metabolic healthy, you release insulin just for what you need, for what you ate. But if you have fatty liver, because you've been eating 90 grams of sugar per day for months or years, then the insulin starts to look like this. It goes up and stays up, never goes back down. And remember, just because I call it diabetes, only when your fasting glucose goes higher than 120, doesn't mean you didn't have diabetes for all practical purposes before, if we look at the insulin production, because insulin is through the growth hormone part that actually causes disease inside our body, whether it's liver, kidney, heart, you name it. It's not so much when the glucose go up, okay? But we define diabetes as glucose going up. Do you know why? Because that's what we have drugs for. Very simple. We don't have drugs for insulin resistance. We have a couple of them I'm mentioning, so nobody cares about that, all right? But we have a way how to figure that out. So what happens then? I found that you do have full-blown diabetes. What are we going to do? We first time with pills. That doesn't work. What do? We give you insulin, right? Hey, we're going to fix that. And everybody loves insulin. Why? Even as a patient. Why? It fixes the sugar. The glucose does go down. Okay, but here's the price you pay with that. If you focus just on glucose and not on insulin, you end up on insulin. Insulin takes that excessive glucose, puts it in the fat, and you gain 15, 20, 30 pounds after that. That's one little thing. And second, the higher the insulin, the more actually countries further to insulin resistance. Okay, the cells don't regulate the receptors because it's too much and they can't work in overdrive in response to insulin. The second, and if you don't believe me, these are some pictures. It happens if you're anybody is on insulin here? I hope not, but if you are, no, that's good. That's a healthy population I have today. But bottom line is, if you were with none this long time ago, because you inject insulin in the same spot, you get those kind of lumps, which is fat accumulation. It shows you what it does. And we actually also, from heart perspective and cancer perspective, if you end up having to control your type 2 diabetes with insulin, you are twice more likely you're going to develop cancer or heart attacks. It doesn't help. Yeah, it fixes the sugar, short-term gain for long-term pain, but it doesn't fix the heart attacks or the heart. It makes it worse. So what I was trying to make a point here, the insulin, if we define diabetes just as a glucose or a sugar problem, we're missing the boat. We need to define diabetes as insulin being up, because insulin has two purposes. One is the ability to help us, our cells, to metabolize the glucose. That's the good side of the insulin. The other part is actually if we get insulin resistance and and in response to fructose, that part actually starts to go down, and we switch the insulin to a growth factor. So we have growth effects. So if you're a child or you're a newborn, you want to grow. That's where insulin is the good guide. But if you're an adult, you don't want to grow, because if you start growing like that, you start to have coronary artery disease, and you start to have, it promotes cancer. And if you try to grow like that into your brain, that's actually, it's a setup for addiction, ADHD, dementia, and depression. So how does fructose makes us sick? I'm going to show you a few mechanisms. Here's the easiest one to understand, what it does to our brain.
Sorry. Come here.
Really, cats are smart. Do you think a cat does not know how to get out of that? No, it blocks their brain. They lose their mind. That's the point. Okay? What about the dog who's out there, is very trained and know how to behave? He's looking at the ice cream. He's about to, look what she's saying to the dog.
Sit. Easy, easy, easy. Easy, easy. Nope. Drop it, Noonie. Drop it, Noonie. Good boy. Sit.
What about 1-year-old human baby? Oops, sorry, that's not what I meant.
He's looking around. Oh my god. Look at this. He's got a lot in his nose.
So obvious, parents don't know that actually we're not supposed to give to our kids any sugar before age 2. And the reason is it's going to addict your brain forever to sugar. That's why. And it's the fructose that does that. So if you don't know why you love so much the sugar, it's got nothing to do with you. It all depends how early you're exposed to that in your life. Okay? And that's extremely important. Fructose effects on brain, it's addiction, and we lose our mind. Sometimes it's just temporary, but eventually if you keep doing that, you're going to lose it forever when you get dementia. So we have now studies showing that fructose causes hunger, desire for food, increases our visual cues. We want to go after it. If we smell it or if we look at if we have it around the house, we're going to go after it. It reduces willpower and recent memory. And this has been shown documented in brain studies. And I know this looks like I'm going into detail, but I really don't think you're going to get it unless I show you how this works. Here is how we control our food intake. We got 3 brain centers. One is homeostatic center. That's our hypothalamus. That's the guy that tells us when to stop eating and when we need to go where we're hungry, we need to find food. But this listens to actually just food intake. But this guy is actually controlled by 2 others. A younger brain that we develop adjustments at our executive center is here in the front, the frontal lobe. That's what made us humans, and smart. And then the other part, which is even more important, is the pleasure or reward center, okay, which is much faster and much stronger. All animals have it, we have it. It actually easily overrides what our judgment center does. So if you are healthy and you're metabolic healthy and you have some sugar and sweets, no problem. What we call insulin sensitive. If you hit somebody with sugar, nothing happens in our brain that makes us want more. As a matter of fact, if it's too sweet and you're healthy, you don't like it, okay? But if you already have insulin resistance and you have that sweet tooth and you're obese, if you're exposed to that, that's the opposite. It blocks your judgment center. It stimulates your pleasure reward center to want more. It stimulates automatically your homeostatic center, hypothalamus, says, just give me more no matter what. And actually, you'll never stop eating. It makes you hungry, and you don't know that you're full and you already ate. And that's his job. And then what happens if we work in this country 8 hours, 10, 12 hours a day? We get stressed, right? All right? So, or if we've studied for SAT as teenagers, we get stressed too. So what does the stress do to our mind? It releases cortisol, and it's going to do another thing. It stimulates one of the little nuclei, our oldest part of the brain, primitive brain, is called amygdala. It's part of the limbic system pleasure center. Stress released from cortisol stimulates the amygdala and tells, there is a problem, there's a threat, you need to fix this. And amygdala needs food to be calmed down. So even if you may have not been hungry in that moment, you're stressed by something else, the first thing you're going to do, you're going to eat. And what are you going to go for? Sweet. That's not going to fix the issue. So it's a setup, and this is what we call stress eating. There is a reason. And the reason is because our primitive brain, amygdala, is designed for only one purpose, to prevent us from starvation. Unfortunately, when we're no longer able to starve, we get into trouble. And that's what happens. And, the fact that there is a major addiction here going on. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get rid of this. What did I do? Pause share. Okay, good. That's what I want. All right. So the reason why, so recently actually some studies just came out basically a few weeks ago. It turns out that ultra-processed food and sugar, it's as addictive as actually drugs and smoking. Okay, potential. Now, this is association, not causation, but that brings back. And then you've been trying to diet even as a teenager, as a young adult, you don't know why it's not working. And you know why it's not working? Because ultra-processed food feeding and sugar starts with the formulas, all formulas. It's not food. I understand that the baby needs to survive. You can breastfeed. You have to do that. But if the baby doesn't need it, get off that. Why? And unfortunately, only 25% of kids beyond 3 months old in this country are actually fed by breastfeeding. They're fed by formulas. And it's a problem. It's a major problem. And that's how we start. So basically, fructose is a sugar, but also some others, the sugar-free sweeteners, frying food, MSG stands for glutamate, and that's part of our savory taste. It actually changes our biochemistry, releases dopamine, stimulates our that reward center, and changes our behavior. It's not the behavior that changes the chemistry. So there is no free will once you put something sweet in your mouth. You actually going to go for the path of the greatest pleasure. And I like what Jeremy Goldberg said, courage is knowing it might hurt and doing it anyway. Stupidity is the same, and that's why life is hard. All right. The second way how actually fructose hurts us is because look at those 5 products. What do you think? They all look tasty. It's called browning. So that browning that we do is actually what gives excellent taste to our food. But in the same time, it also oxidizes our protein. Basically, glucose or fructose will just bind to the protein on the meat. It gives that amazing taste, but at the same time, causes oxidative stress and actually contributes to our aging, okay? And that's our aging is just a matter of dealing with oxidative stress. And browning of the proteins in our body actually is aggravated by fructose 7 times as opposed to just glucose. And fructose is another metabolic compound that's called methyl dioxide that liver produces from fructose that is 250 times more potent than that. And nobody says you should never eat something brown or your turkey. All I'm saying is the more you eat, the faster you get coronary disease, because that's what oxidizes that LDL that I tell you converts into bad, into the rancid LDL, okay? And the faster you get old, okay? And this is an example of natural browning of this is a human rib cartilage. See, newborn, white. The older we get, is brown. That's because our proteins get oxidized and glycated, just natural, but you can do that. Take your sweet time for 88 years at room temperature, or you can do it way faster by frying at temperature over 325 or having a lot of fructose intake in your diet. I'm going to stop here for now, and we can have a 10 minutes break, and I'll just leave it to you and you can ask me some questions, okay? All right. Show you how the third point, how fructose actually hurts us, is because, as I mentioned, inside the cell is able to reprogram our liver cell from burning to storing. But the way it does that, I'm going to introduce another strange name for you, which you don't need to memorize, but now it targets a specific enzyme called AMP kinase inside the cell, and it blocks it and it destroys it irreversible. And that's how it does that. Why? This AMP kinase is our energy sensor. Whenever cells feels like it's starving, it doesn't have enough to burn, it doesn't have enough energy, which is ATP, it's going to start burning glucose and fatty acids to create the energy. But what this fructose does, it inhibits that enzyme. So if it does that, then we're not going to be able to burn. Doesn't matter if you ate or not, and you're going to convert to a growth and inflammatory and storing kind of cell. Okay, and it starts first with the liver cell, but eventually moves to the other cells too. Once you have insulin resistance, that's what insulin resistance does. Insulin resistance that's triggered by the fatty liver is going to tell, liver knows, okay, we have too much to store. Me and the fat will store. but the other tissues cannot afford to store because they got to function. The muscle cannot store fat, otherwise cannot move. The brain cannot store fat because it's got no place to go. So what it's going to do is going to send insulin resistance signals to other cells. Say, you guys don't eat. You need to deal first with this storage stuff problem we have. And so that's why this is important. Indirectly, once after months or years of exposure to excessive fructose, you eventually get insulin resistance. And while some organs are actually having a storage problem, the other organs are having actually a starvation problem. Okay, so that's important because it sickens our mitochondria when that happens. And also fructose by releasing, and it does that by releasing this methyl glyoxal. The second inflammatory marker that it does, it releases uric acid, and uric acid, anybody has ever had gout? That's what uric acid does, and but also causes inflammation, high blood pressure, and contributes to fatty liver. And then you can say, well, what about this AMP kinase? Actually, there are ways of how to actually activate this AMP kinase. And look, fasting and exercise. Stop eating fructose for 12 hours, then he gets back to where he needs to do to function, or you can exercise to activate this AMP kinase. And we have drug that affects the AMP kinase, which is metformin. There are newer, most recent ones that we use for heart failure is Farxiga or Jardiance. What they do, they release glucose in the urine, but they also improve insulin resistance and provide cardiorenal protection. So basically, anything we ever wanted to do, if they stimulate the AMP kinase, is good for you. If it actually blocks it, it's bad for you. Okay? So, and this methyl glyoxal, that's a byproduct of fructose, actually can come just from frying food. You take any food you want, you fry it. You create this methyl glyoxal out of fructose just by heating it up. And once you over 325 degrees, and so it can come actually from our liver when you just eat too much sugar, or it can come from outside if you actually fry your food. And it will do the same thing. Stops the cell from burning. You start to grow and store. And then with time, you can convert from having this nice, healthy pick and trough versions of insulin into fatty liver and insulin resistance. So, but there's one more thing, okay? Everybody knows, right? If you come to my heart failure clinic, I'm going to tell you got to cut your salt, right? From the diet to avoid the water, right? Well, lately I kind of stopped saying that. And the reason why I stopped saying that, not because it doesn't matter. It does matter. You do need to be moderate about that. But it doesn't matter if you actually have too much sugar intake, because we learned that the way we absorb excessive fructose in the diet is by activating the sodium retention from our kidney. So fructose absorption comes with salt absorption, and fructose is what makes our kidney retain the sodium, and then water follows. So it's fructose from sugar, then it's the salt, then it's the water. Okay, and then after we get insulin resistance and diabetes, then insulin per se does the same thing, makes us retain sodium and water. And so it's a double whammy here. So I am trying now to focus more on asking my patients to try to limit their sugar from the diet. And I said, look, if you want to cook at home, you can use salt per your taste. Just don't use ingredients that already have salt. But if you go and you eat out, don't, because it's 10, 20-fold more both fructose and sugar and salt in whatever place you like to eat out from. Too overwhelming. And that's what I'm saying. And it's important because it contributes to, if you have heart, kidney, liver disease, diabetes, you're going to start retaining salt. You're going to have your legs swell up. Even if your heart function is good, you don't know why you swell up. I promise you had too much sugar intake. And it's not necessarily from that day. It's cumulative. It could be indeed that day gotten worse the day before, but it's also if you have insulin resistance and you activate that, you're way more sensitive. It's more of a chronic process. And so the take-home message is don't watch so much the salt, watch your sugar, because then whatever salt you eat is going to stay in your system. But if you are careful with sugar, you may allow yourself to have a little bit of salt from time to time, as long as you require that for cooking at home. And like Mark Twain said, education consists mainly of what we have unlearned And it is the fructose from the sugar that makes our kidney retain the sodium and water. And basically, you got to cut the sugar to avoid the fluid retention. And yeah, so I told you all this bad news about sugar and fructose and fatty liver. It's been going on for 10, 20, 30 years. And wait a minute, why are we here? We still hope we can do something about it. And the answer is absolutely. So here's a study Dr. Lustig and his colleague has done. And by the way, since then, we have several studies, including one of the studies actually done by Emory Children's Hospital. And they reproduce exactly the same thing. Took these 18 years old teenagers who are morbidly obese, they have type 2 diabetes, they have high cholesterol, they have high blood pressure, that at age 17 or 18, and then they looked how much sugar they were eating and that. It was about 14% of all their calorie intake was sugar. And then what they did, they replaced the sugar with starches. In other words, they replaced the fructose with glucose, because starches have slow release glucose, and they cut the sugar from 14% to 4%, but also made sure that their weight stayed the same. And they followed them for 9 days. In other words, they want to make sure if their weight will go down today, they'll call them up and say, eat more, eat more. All right, they'll make sure the weight stays stable. So then when you do that, then they measure their liver in the fat. Within 9 days, it went down by 20%, just 9 days of no sugar. The blood pressure went down, which means their sodium retention has improved. Their bad cholesterol improved. Their triglycerides, and remember, triglycerides are the marker of insulin, went down by 50%. And guess what? Their insulin level went down by 50%. And this is just 9 days, and they didn't cut to zero. They cut it from 14 to 4%. So the answer is yes, and you can fix that very fast. But again, fructose is the main villain here. So then everybody wants the answer to this magic question. But, not everybody wants to do it because of that. I just want to lose weight. I've been trying my whole life to lose some weight, right? So I got a slide for you. I'll tell you how to lose weight, okay? This is what we know about losing weight, okay? When we eat, people who have stable weight, okay, and they don't gain weight, all the glucose that is produced, it comes from our nutrition, releases insulin. Insulin puts the glucose into fat. The fat then, when they're happy and they have enough stores, will release a hormone called leptin. And that's how fat signals to the brain, hey, we have enough energy. You don't need to eat anymore. Stop there. Don't gain more weight. You don't need to eat more. And then what happens is also makes us then be energetic and start spending it. Okay? So that's a normal control. That's how it happens. If you eat what we call real food. But what happens if you have insulin resistance? Insulin that stays elevated levels actually blocks the leptin from being seen by the brain. Okay, so then your brain is hungry and makes you eat more, and you keep going up. But brain does another thing. It stops the body from spending the energy. So not only that if you have insulin resistance, you're going to eat more because the brain thinks I need higher and higher weight. They're also going to start feeling clumsy and no energy because the brain is not telling your adrenaline to activate the system to start burning the fat, so you use the energy. Okay, so it's a double sword. And that's the difference between this kind of insulin release that's up and down for a healthy person they'll have then a normal, stable weight versus the one who has insulin resistance and has a sweet tooth forever. Okay, and what it does so that's what fructose does. Okay, it resets our hypothalamus work straight there by actually hypothalamus lipostat to higher and higher weight, because if it causes insulin resistance, the high elevated insulin blocks the leptin from being seen by the brain. And then you keep eating and eating, and your brain doesn't know when to stop. It keeps thinking you don't have enough storage. Okay? So you're not going to ever lose weight if you do not cut the sugar from whatever you're doing. Now, there are exceptions from the rule. There are plenty of people who eat a lot of sugar and they got no problem, they stay lean. Well, those are some lucky, genetically modified, happy people. And maybe one day, they will be just the only ones who will inherit this earth. But you cannot count on that. Not everybody gets lucky like that, okay? Everybody else who is an average citizen is going to gain weight no matter what you do through this mechanism I was telling you. Our hypothalamus will just look at that. And that's what it does on our brain. But it also, I showed you, affects our liver, affects our muscles, skeletal muscles, pancreas. You can actually get fat in the pancreas, and eventually, initially, pancreas secretes a lot of insulin, and that's what we call insulin resistance. But eventually, when we get type 2 diabetics, insulin starts to go down and start to have pancreatic failure. And a good half of the patients, if they continue, will actually eventually exhaust their pancreas, and they will acquire almost type 1 diabetes. They'll have no insulin left over. Okay, and then actually, about 20 years ago, I studied this in the lab, in the mice, because I want to have a similar model, and I just get mice a equivalent of a burger a day and a soda a day with fructose. And within 16 weeks, they got actually cardiomyopathy and heart failure. And so we know it actually sickens the heart too. This does the same on the kidneys, as I mentioned, makes us oxidize and convert our bad LDL into a bad cholesterol. Basically, we cannot fix this unless we cut the sugar and switch to whole foods. And the answer is, does it work? And the answer is, depending how serious you are, yes, absolutely, it works. And I'm going to have some examples at the end. And those who are here, who actually have done what I asked them to do, they can tell you for themselves. All right. So what's our problem when we eat too much sugar? We got an energy store problem. Our cells are actually hoarding too much fat, and they get sick. You can't find anything you need there in that house, can you? And also on top of that, they are starving too. They're always hungry, tired, or both. Does that sound familiar? All right, and that's because our mitochondria don't work, because the fructose does that. Again, excessive fructose consumption, not from the fruits. Hey, one more thing. We have also kids here. I have a couple of slides for kids. Now they're going to enjoy it. So here's why do we catch cold? All right, if you've seen around, there are some people who get a lot of colds a year, and there are some people who never get sick. What's the difference? Well, they got a stronger immune system, correct. But why is it that sometimes you have moments in your life that you get a lot of colds and sometimes you don't? You're still the same person with the same immune system. And the reason is, fructose does that. Basically, not only that it does it in kids, if they have a high exposure of sugary beverages in their childhood, their risk of asthma goes huge, and they have a lot of respiratory infection, because it really changes your immune system, activates the non-specific immune system. But even the pregnant woman who drank a lot of juices and ate a lot of cookies and cakes with a lot of fructose, their kids are going to have asthma. So as somebody who one day will be pregnant, keep that in mind, what you're doing to your future child. And the reason why it does that is because fructose, not only that it feeds the bad bacteria, the streptococcus loves fructose, just like we like it. So that means we get populated with more of those bad bacteria in our respiratory tract and in our mouth, and you get sinusitis. But also fructose blocks the specific immune system and promotes autoimmune conditions such as asthma, colitis, arthritis, and including colon cancer. And think this way, the effect on the immune system. Our immune system is designed to be like a burning fire that's localized into a fireplace. That's how basically localized targeted inflammation to destroy a specific target. That's what we call our acquired immune T cell response. But that needs to be kept in check. And if you don't, you activate what we call the native immunity, the non-specific, what we call macrophages, neutrophils. It will be more like a fire in the forest everywhere. All right. So basically what fructose does, it blocks our specific immune system from targeting cancer cells, specific bacteria, and enhances the autoimmune one, the one that reacts against our own self. Because and the reason why it reacts is because bacteria and viruses have learned to simulate antigens that are similar to our own in the body. So then the immune system was targeted against the bacteria, actually works against us. So it pretty much, it's a setup not only for us to be weakened by the cancer, but also to create autoimmunity. And there's one more thing. How many of you know that they have low vitamin D3 level? I know because at least few of you have checked it, and I told you have low vitamin D3 level. And the reason is fructose activates an enzyme that actually degrades vitamin D. So whenever I see somebody with low vitamin D3, I know they eat too much sugar. unless they're alcoholic. Again, I have very few patients like that, so that's not my concern. All right, and you can supplement all you want. If your enzyme in the body kills it, it doesn't matter, okay? And so that's important. That's important to know. And why is vitamin D3 particularly important for the immune system? Because you just need a little vitamin D just for the bones, but for the immune cells, for immune system to not have autoimmunity and actually have the specific, you need about 50-fold higher level than that. Okay, so it's a completely different story here, and that's one of those things that are important. And another thing that happens is, you know, you can get arthritis. Why? Because fructose activates inflammation everywhere in the body that I was telling you about, through the same non-specific activation of the wrong immune system, not the good one, targeted one. And here is some data showing that threefold risk of arthritis. This is not the gouty part. I'm talking about just, you have some joint ache somewhere from 20, 30 years ago. It suddenly sometimes flares up. You don't know why. Well, that's what happened. You just had too much sugar. You know, it's one of those. Cut it down for a month and see what happens if you feel better. Oh, no, the ortho said it's a matter of time. I'm bone on bone. It's a matter of time I'm going to need replacement. Yes or no? Try first to cut the sugar. The second thing is also you can get a specific gouty arthritis, which is just from uric acid, you know, and that one is definitely triggered by fructose. It's not the only thing that, you know, we know that consuming a lot of meat and seafood can cause that too, but fructose definitely does it. And this is actually a picture of a very young patient of mine that I saw yesterday in the clinic. Trust me, this is very painful. What about the tooth decay and heart disease? What do they have in common when we go to the dentist? Of course, the sugar. All right, actually, it's been known for at least 60 years, the association, the worse is your teeth, the worse you're going to get cardiovascular disease. And the reason is, and here's for kids, the sad story, but we can't ignore because we can fix it. Half of our kids have at least one cavity in the baby teeth. We know that. We find it annoying when we have to take them to the dentist and they fix it. Oh, what's the big deal? But we don't think what's causing that. And then we have also another half, more than half, have the same cavity in their permanent teeth. Okay? And we ignore it. And not only that, but look what happens if you just put the tooth just for an hour in the soda. The acid destroys the enamel immediately. And then, you know, I'm not even talking about if you keep it for longer than that. And what do? We use a straw because that's the proper way of doing it, right? Well, guess what? The more you straw it, the longer it stays around your teeth. And it makes it much, much worse, much faster. Okay? Basically what it takes is the acid to kill the enamel and then the fructose to feed the strep in your mouth, to feed the bacteria to create the infection. Okay? So that's just the tooth part of it.